Thursday, so welcome everyone, and good afternoon to everyone who's joining us from across the ADB family. My name is Nisha Krishnan, and I'm a climate change specialist with CCSD, and I'm also the Community Resilience Partnership Program's fund manager. And it is my privilege today to moderate today's discussion on building community resilience through national climate funds. Before we get started, if we could just do a round of housekeeping, please, if I could just have that slide up. Just so that everyone knows, this meeting is being recorded and will be shared after the session. We will also, if you do have any questions that come up during the course of the discussion, please do use the chat bar to drop in your questions as we move forward. And we will also ask you to please do turn on your video, especially during the Q&A. If there are any other technical issues while the presentation is going on, please do reach out to the tech support team in the chat box. And with that, maybe we will get started. So this work was inspired by discussions with ADB DMCs at the second CRPP forum, the Community Resilience Partnership Forum last year in 2024. The Community Resilience Partnership Forum is actually housed within CCSD and is focused on scaling local level adaptation solutions that are at the intersection of addressing poverty reduction, gender, and climate. We do this through building the evidence base, building community capacity and institutional capacity to design and address adaptation at the local level, as well as actually supporting ADB projects to design projects in such a way that they're addressing these needs, as well as to invest in those projects going forward through our trust fund and our investment fund. As I was just describing, we are quite interested in building the evidence base, which is how this paper and the work that Sejal and Suman are going to be presenting came about. Before we get started, and before we introduce today's speakers, I did want to get a little bit of insight as to how much you know about adaptation finance. And so if you could just navigate to the first question on Mentimeter. The Menti, if you could just either scan this QR code or enter the code 42195397 when you're there. The first question is about and if you could show the question, per UNEP Adaptation Gaps report in 2023, what percentage of adaptation finance went to projects with specific focus on local communities? Is it anywhere between 0 and 50%? So if people want to sort of input their answers, that would be great. We'll give you a minute or two to do that. Great, we have a wide range. Maybe give it another minute or so. Okay. Great, so about 17% actually of finance, which is only about $16.5 billion over those 4 years, went to projects, adaptation projects with specific local focus on local communities, which is really not much given the scale of financing needed. And as ADB DMCs are more and more interested in addressing the impacts of climate change on local communities, this is really this is becoming increasingly important, which is what CRPP focuses on. What this paper then does, and what our work has done, is to look at how national governments can actually mobilize adaptation finance and channel it to local communities. With that, if I could move to the next slide, I'd also like to introduce our first speaker, Sejal Patel, who's a senior researcher with the International Institute for Environment and Development, to walk us through how we could actually look at getting money to the local level. Over to you, Sejal. Thanks.
Thanks, Nisha. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for having me. So as Nisha says, I'll briefly set the scene and present some findings from the study we undertook last year on getting money to the local level through national climate funds, before handing it over to Sumanji, who will talk about how Nepal are working on building a national fund with community access. So next slide, please. So with climate impacts increasing in frequency, magnitude, and duration, the costs for financing adaptation and resilience are significantly increasing. This is not being matched by an increase of financing and is leaving a growing gap of financing needs. So as Nisha said, with the adaptation gap report, we're finding very small percentage of financing is going to adaptation. And their report in 2024 finds a financing gap of 387 billion US dollars a year until 2030. So in order to meet this need, there is an increasing interest in nationally coordinated finance vehicles or funds that can invest in the priorities identified and elaborated in countries' national adaptation plans, nationally determined contributions, and national development and planning strategies. Instruments such as national climate funds can improve the government's ability to manage and blend public, private, and other sources of finance, coordinate across departments, governance levels, and donors, use on and off budget channels, and it may be set up as an independent facility with an independent secretariat or with structures within government departments. There is a significant need to get funding down to the local level, which is the level where impacts are being felt, and it's the level where responses will be taking place by majority. And setting up mechanisms that can channel to the local level can be difficult. It requires a lot of careful planning on how the local level will be reached and how the design of the mechanism can work to reach the targeted actors. So we are seeing community windows being developed in national climate funds, and community windows are dedicated funding allocations for targeted flows to local community actors to invest in their community's identified priorities. So this might be funding purposefully allocated for access by the local government units that are representing the interests of their communities, or it could be funding allocated for direct access by local community groups. Next slide, please. And so one of the aspects to consider when talking about getting funding down to the local level is what is meant by the local level. I won't talk through these definitions of local communities and local community actors, but I just wanted to point out here that local community actors can include public sector actors, such as local government authorities. It can include private sector actors, such as micro, small, and medium enterprises or cooperatives. There are civil society actors, such as community-based organizations, grassroots women's groups, and local NGOs. And there are households and individuals, and particularly the poorer, more vulnerable, or more marginalized groups. And there are existing community windows in national funds that are providing funding down to this level as well. So just to point that out. Next slide, please. So in this study, we screened a long list of over 100 national funds and selected these 16 or so funds to take a deeper look into how they were set up, how they are operating, what is or was working well, and what challenges they have or are facing in order to draw out some lessons. So and our approach to the analysis was reviewing fund documentation along with key informant interviews with some of the fund secretariats. So I can briefly talk through some of the findings of this study. Next slide, please. Okay, so firstly, one of the key findings was that there needs to be a conscious and proactive process that considers the national and local priorities and makes a clear case for the objectives and ambitions for a fund to reach the local level. This is important because you need to build the long-term political buy-in and support for setting up and capitalizing these kind of funds, as well as driving a purpose-driven approach to designing the fund in relation to the design processes, the delivery, the approach. Many of the funds in the list were initially set out in acts or regulations, usually through amendments to existing environment or climate acts to specify financing modalities. Then there's a number of the next findings need to be thought about simultaneously, and they're just sort of broken down to think through. So there's this consideration that needs to go to ensuring that local actors are eligible for accessing funding. Accessing the funds requires eligibility to a range of local community actors, as I was describing before. And it's important to then support different types of activities and processes through different types of stakeholder groups. And so ensuring that a range of actors can directly access the fund allows the Fund Secretariat to provide funding across different actors, and it's not a given. Often it can take years, months and years to set up procedures and mechanisms that can enable funding in different ways. Relatedly, in designing the procedures and mechanisms, fund managers need to be thinking about how financing can be provided directly to that targeted local community actor. The approach that many of the funds have taken is to establish allocation commitments for local community actors. So, for example, in Antigua and Barbuda's Sustainable Island Resource Framework Fund, there was a stipulation that at least 15% under the related act of all the funds must go to NGO actors. The next sort of consideration is in deciding to target community actors. The fund managers need to carefully consider how to target and reach the poorest and most marginalized groups. For example, in targeting loans at households, Antigua and Barbuda's fund targeted female-headed households, single mothers, people with disabilities, older people, and youth. And they use vulnerability assessments and screening mechanisms. And as part of that, an important characteristic is in investing in local community actor capacities to utilize these funds. So capacity building, technical support, project preparation, finance, and the terms of the financing. And just on the last two, so another key area is ensuring the meaningful representation of local communities in governance and decision-making structures. So on the boards, in technical and advisory structures, and in accountability and transparency mechanisms. And the final point is on fund managers needing to look at the current governance and financing structures in country and consider the most appropriate way to set up the fund that can balance the resourcing available with the design and targeting that is desired. And that was a very whistle-stop tour, but I'll stop there because I think this will be brought to life a bit more through the example of Nepal. Thank you.
Thanks, Sajal. And as we transition to the Nepal example, this was really helpful in sort of setting out the experience so far, particularly of funds that are based in the Asia Pacific region, of which there were several that Sajal and others from the team actually interviewed and understood their experience. So as we move on to Nepal, where Nepal is also actually helping set up a national financing facility that's focused on adaptation. And Sumanji is here with us today from Kathmandu, who's been helping design that community window for that facility going forward. Sumanji, you're up next, and you have about 8 minutes to go through your whistle-stop tour. So over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, Nisha, and thank you, Cecil, for that background and the perspective on that. I'd just like to start with the country background in terms of Nepal being very vulnerable because it's a very mountainous country, more than 80% of the land area being mountains, and high rainfall and all glacial-fed rivers, around 220 billion cubic meters of water flowing out, surface water flowing out to India. But even despite that amount of water, we have high seasonal and temporal variations. Some people who have problems with flood, we have problems with landslides, we have problems with coping mechanisms like agriculture going down and livelihoods, particularly because Nepal is also a very low income country with only 0.04% of world GDP. It's having that, and more than 80% of the people 61% of the people still live in the rural areas. But then given that we have very high risk of annual loss of GDP due to disaster and climate related issues. So next slide, please. So Nepal has been navigating its issues of climate change and disaster in parallel, sort of not in a very synchronous manner, but in sort of parallel even since 1992, now it's many very rich policy and action research frameworks. But then the first one came in 2010 when we designed the NAPA, the National Adaptation Plan of Action. That was followed by climate change policy of 2011. But the two major things that happened in Nepal has really changed the policy shift and paradigm, and that was in 2015, from which Nepal entered into a politically a federated state from a unilateral state. So that means that the local governments and the local communities were now more in charge of their adaptation requirements and disaster management programs and plans. The constitution actually decentralized this role to the local governments very heavily through 2017 acts. And then there was also a very big earthquake in Nepal in 2015 that killed about 10,000 people. That suddenly raised the awareness on the need for disaster preparedness and planning and what sort of management had to go in. So and what sort of priority that was set for disaster, and rather than just going on building new things to try and adjust people's disaster and local adaptation needs. So these are the two major events that really wanted to shift in the policy. And in 2019 there was another NAP, National Adaptation Plan, that was defined, and climate change policy as well. But then following to then can we go to the next one? Yes. So then we started doing this adaptation plan that was defined has been quite ambitious. It talks about $47 million of funding requirement over the next 25 years up to 2050. That's about nearly $2 billion a year from now. So that Nepal will hardly be able to afford that. And in that sense, Nepal is only contributing about, the plan says about $1.5 billion out of the $47 billion. So there's a huge funding gap and deficit on how we do that. It defines 8 different areas and 2 cross-cutting thematic areas and 2 cross-cutting areas. But then how to generate that money? So Nepal is always, but despite the huge requirement, it has been able to put forward or ambitious plan. The resource backup is very low. And its competitiveness to approach to GCF and other funding mechanisms and other international financing mechanisms for climate change adaptation is also very low due to its low preparedness. And that's when the ADB and government of Nepal thought that we will have to do something about it. And so they started thinking about putting up Nepal's Green Resilient Financing Facility. That would be a centralized, a big facility about $1 billion to start with. Because out of $47 billion, Nepal has for till now only been able to mobilize about less than $500 million. It's about to the range of $300 to $400 million. Although it talks about $47 billion. So even $1 billion would be a good size of facility to do that. But this $1 billion now is now it's in the conceptual stage. But now we're planning to have 4 windows under that plan. Of which are distinctly the window one would be for government investments. That will be large scale adaptation investments that the government will apply for. The federal governments, the local governments, the provincial governments, they will have access to these funds. The window 2 is now is quite dedicated for community adaptation funds, so that there is no hogging by the government or the local government or the federal government, and there's an equal opportunity. The communities come up with their resilient actions, like the plans, and try to bid for that and provide the commitment and do their own resilience actions. The window 3 has been dedicated for the private sector. The window 4 is now social majority for innovation window. So we have all these 4 windows, although window 1 may be a bigger one, window 2 may be a smaller one, let's say smaller than window 1 and window 3. But then we're still working on that. The numbers are yet not defined, and it's in the conceptual stages. And a TA has been approved, and under the TA, now in the process of, the ADB is now in the process of recruiting international consultants to support this activity. The consulting service is about $1.75 billion, with about 40 international consultants input and 108 local consultant inputs. That's going on. It's expected to start very soon. The next slide, please. Now, Nepal's adaptation, when we're talking about NAP, the National Adaptation Plan is a big one. But then how do you really translate into local actions is a big challenge. You can think about a big national program, but then how does it go down to local level? So Nepal's unique approach on this has been preparation of the LAPAs. What we call LAPAs is Local Adaptation Plan of Action, or even sometimes CAPAs, that's Community Level Plan Adaptation Actions. Nepal is about 753 local governments, and out of that, about 200 LAPAs have already been prepared. But the problem, the LAPAs, the good thing about LAPAs is that it picks up on the major thematic areas of the National Adaptation Plan. It tries to define the local requirements and local needs, and to carry out your adaptation planning and disaster planning, disaster response planning. The problem with LAPA is these are the strengths is that it is hinged around local governments, which can provide sustainability, which can provide the local knowledge, which can provide the local inputs on the design of the facility. So it's not very external thing. It's a locally grown and based on traditional knowledge. But the problem with these things are that they are very, very small term planning. So it's got only 2 to 4 years planning window. So that you don't have a longer term linkages to how the adaptation actions. So the results are not very, very pronounced, and sometimes can be very, very very small ones that do not last a very long time. So the problem is that so if you have something like GREF, then that can always provide you a sustainable planning. It can provide you capacity building support that the local governments lack so much in planning and designing facilities. And sometimes LAPAs, what happens is, because you're doing a local plan of action, you always miss the idea of a cross-border or cross-administrative boundary action. Like if your stream runs through three local governments, then how do you do that? So these things are all missing parts in the LAPA. But nevertheless, LAPA is a very good exercise in how local requirements are articulated, particularly the marginalized communities or the women groups. We have gone to many field visits. We found that women-led initiatives have been very strong in Nepal, very, very whatever. These are particularly as Nepal is facing a very big flow of out migration from Nepal due to lack of problems with the employment and income generation. So these villages are very dominated by women, and so women programs and marginalized programs, marginalized communities, the LAPAs are able to articulate that. But the weak also part is also the disaster level planning, where it's got a very weak linkages with the disaster management planning, and both documents are being prepared in parallel. So somehow sometimes there's duplication. So when you come with GRAF, we intend to address this as well, to have a more synergy between disaster response management plan and doing this. The next one, please. So in terms of planning, in terms of investment of local adaptation funds in Nepal, where we see about 3 different types of models. One is on budget and on treasury that is put. Sorry, I'm almost out of time, but I just we've gone through this. So on budget and treasury is the government that flows the government budget, which is a strong government ownership, but it's very bureaucratic process and takes a long time to implement, as you know, with anyone was. The other one is on budget and off treasury that still have some elements of the government ownership. And also, I would like to mention here that the Nepal's climate change policy requires that about 80% of the climate change, the target climate fund, should go to the local governments. Although the monitoring part of how much that's actually happening is very low, but that's what is the policy talks about, and we have to start thinking about that. The off-budget, off-treasury programs are usually the NGO and programs, the non-government organizations, which are very quick to implement, maybe very efficient, but very small, and lack sustainability and scaling up approaches. So in this, the next slide, please, the last one. So we were trying to develop therefore we're trying to develop a combination of a on budget, on treasury, and on budget, off treasury, through which we can create a special purpose vehicle either under the Ministry of Finance or the Ministry of Environment, which will have the fund flow mechanisms directly to the local governments, supporting their LAPAs under the community-based programs, but will also have a designated account named as DA here, that can provide a counterpart support on budget, off treasury sort of thing that can provide a capacity building support that's more efficient through that mechanism. So we're discussing on that. These are all discussion ideas. We're not really pinned down anything, but so because I'm out of time, I think I'll have to stop here and engage and discuss. Thank you very much, Nishat, and everyone.
Great, thank you so much, Suman G, and thanks for the very whirlwind sort of description of how you're going about the graph process to design. I think we have some questions coming in, so maybe Alvin, I don't know if you just wanted to come in and ask your question directly.
Thanks, Nisha. Thanks, Sumanji and Sergio for your insightful presentation. I'm raising these questions because we are developing a trust fund in Nauru, and these insights are quite useful. In the Nepal case, does adaptation programming done directly with the municipal councils? We're interested in how the community groups actually are engaged to access the funds, and whether the LAPA is a prerequisite to access the community-based grants. And Sejal, my question to you is in terms of the countries that you looked at, what is an optimal financial structure for the trust funds that gives the best arrangement for community groups to access these funds? Thank you.
Munji, do you want to go first?
Sure. I think that the very good questions, Alvin. Thank you very much for that. Yes, LAPA is not exactly a prerequisite for computable funding, because, like I explained, there are many funds that are being, routed through off-budget funds as well, through many donor agencies. But definitely, because Nepal's policy requires that 80% of the climate funds should go through to the local governments, adaptation funds. And local governments are made responsible by Act to actually harmonize, to monitor, and to allocate budgets. So the local governments are encouraged to prepare the LAPAs. So like I said, out of 753 local governments, only about 200 have done so far. So even without LAPA, local governments are funding their adaptation programs. But it's always advisable and supported by the local government, by the federal government, that LAPAs be prepared. And even the federal government now puts up a budget ceiling for the local governments under conditional grant mechanism to prepare the LAPAs. So is encouraging that Ministry of Local Development. And then community groups, they actually the local government has an environmental unit within their facility, and they also outsource these activities to experts and consultants to prepare the LAPAs. And these LAPAs are also prepared at, like I said, the CAPA. Sometimes we call it community level action plans are prepared. And the marginalized communities, the local communities are very much engaged and into the localized focus group discussions and articulation of the needs and how these will be implemented and sustained, and how the fund flow is taking place. So it's very much a community-driven approach, particularly also being undertaken through microcredit finance organizations that's being run by women over the countries, and they are very much participation of these funds. So what optimal financing structure, as I said, would be, that's what we tried to, on the last slide, is trying to have on-budget, on-treasury system and on-budget, off-treasury system, a blend of that, where your actual investment funds will go through on-treasury funds, flow directly through SPB to the local governments. Nepal has an experience of doing a peacekeeping trust fund before, where there was a lot of infrastructure funding through the peacekeeping trust fund. And similar to that, the local governments can have access to the SPV funds, that they can put up their plans through the LAPA, or otherwise the LAPA is very much can be a dynamic document. So they'll apply for the funds and get the funding, but then you also provide capacity building support and external support and research and development and these activities through off budget, on budget but off treasury funds. So that are more sensible that way, because Nepal governments usually do not try to spend money on in terms of capacity building and in terms of research and development. It's not in the government's appetite. They say that no, we just want to do some infrastructure. That always happens that. So we need to have a blend is what I feel. I don't know if I've answered, but somehow, thank you.
Thanks, Munji. And Sejal, if you want to take that question, as well as the next question that Jitendra has asked to you, the chat, please.
Yeah, sure. I think Sumanji captured that pretty well. And I think that speaks to also this question on optimal finance structure. In that there isn't necessarily an optimal structure as such. It will depend on the context of the country and how the prioritization and the identification of activities is sort of structured in that country. But what we found in terms of optimal is having sub-windows within a window. So having those specific allocations for different community groups, and then ensuring the terms for access, the terms for how the financing is provided is tailored to that group to really enable that access. And And so then funds will do prioritization in different ways. So they'll, for example, there's funds that have annual processes that do joint identification of priority areas. And then also, yeah, they would cater their capacity building, technical support, project preparatory funding as part of their offer based on what they're seeing they need. But if I give the example, for example of Antigua and Barbuda's Sustainable Island Resource Framework Fund that I mentioned during the presentation, they in a particular under a particular program had 3 windows. So they had one window which was $3 million in grants that was accessible by national governments. Then they had a second window for civil society organizations, so 1 million in small allocation grants for civil society organizations, and then a window for vulnerable homes and businesses, so $2 million in concessional revolving microloans for individuals, households, and small businesses. And again, if you look into the details of how some of these funding funds were provided, the funds to the homes and businesses was very flexible. They offered repayment extensions on timelines, very concessional rates, things like this to really target the recipients and tailor the funding. Yeah, I hope that answers the question. Thank you.
Thanks. And all of this is also in the technical note that Jane pasted into the chat as well, and happy to have other sort of follow-up discussions on this. I realize that we're actually over time, and I'm really sorry, Jitendra, that we didn't get to answering your question, but happy to do a follow-up as well. So thanks everyone for joining us. If you do have a second, please do go back to the Mentimeter, and we have a question around if and how this Insights Thursday has helped you sort of improve your understanding of national climate funds and community access to that. And we look forward to engaging with you over the course of the next few months and years. So thanks, everyone. Please do answer this question on your way out. Thanks.